In rural Millbrook, Georgia, a 70-year-old widow was about to shatter her family's assumptions. What started as Sunday dinner took a shocking turn when they dismissed her business dreams as, quote, fantasy. Brenda Miller wasn't your typical retiree. For 45 years, she had managed impossible budgets and rebellious teenagers, known for steel-backed determination. When her children laughed at her farming plan, they had no idea they were walking into danger. Brenda's revelation of her $230,000 savings and secret agricultural certifications would lead to consequences they never imagined. What began as family mockery would become their desperate plea for employment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sweet tea glasses sat sweating on Brenda Miller's dining room table, untouched since she'd filled them 20 minutes ago. The fried chicken had grown cold, the mashed potatoes forming a skin, but nobody seemed to notice. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by the steady tick of Harold's old grandfather clock in the corner, the one thing she couldn't bring herself to move since he'd passed 3 years ago. Brenda smoothed her napkin across her lap and tried again. I know it sounds ambitious, but I've done my research. The abandoned Walmart has been sitting empty for 2 years now, and with the right modifications, Mom. Michael's voice carried that particular tone she remembered from his teenage years, the one that said he was about to explain something obvious to someone too dense to understand. You're 70 years old. I'm aware of my age, thank you. Amanda set down her fork with deliberate precision, the same gesture she'd used in boardrooms to signal her patience was wearing thin. What Daddy's trying to say is that starting a business at your stage of life, well, it's just not practical. My stage of life? Brenda's fingers tightened around her tea glass. And what stage would that be exactly? The retirement stage, Michael said, leaning forward with the expression of someone explaining basic math to a child. The stage where you're supposed to be enjoying your golden years, not chasing after some. He gestured vaguely with his hand. Some farming fantasy. The word fantasy hit her like a physical blow. Brenda had spent 45 years managing teenagers, dealing with irate parents, balancing budgets that never stretched far enough, and somehow keeping Millbrook High School running despite constant bureaucratic obstacles. She'd buried a husband, raised 2 children, and maintained a household through economic recessions and personal crises. But her son thought her dreams were fantasies. It's vertical farming, she said quietly. Hydroponics and LED growing systems. Year-round production with 90% less water usage than traditional farming. I've been studying it for... You've been studying it? Amanda's laugh was sharp, professional. The same laugh she probably used when clients suggested unrealistic merger terms. Mom, watching YouTube videos isn't the same as understanding complex agricultural systems. Heat rose in Brenda's cheeks. She stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and walked to the built-in hutch that had belonged to Harold's grandmother. From behind a stack of photo albums, she withdrew a manila folder thick with papers, certificates, and printed articles. She set it on the table with a soft thud. Georgia Southern University, she said, opening the folder. Certificate in Sustainable Agriculture. Correspondence course, completed last year. She pulled out another document. Hydroponic farming certification from Auburn University Extension, and this, she unfolded a bank statement, is my savings account. Harold's life insurance, plus what I've saved from my pension over the past 3 years. $230,000. Michael's face went pale. Amanda's mouth opened slightly, then closed. I've been planning this since before your father died, Brenda continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He knew about the courses, the research. He encouraged me. She touched the edge of Harold's picture on the sideboard. Said it was never too late to grow something new. Mom? Michael's voice had lost its condescending edge, replaced by something that sounded almost panicked. That's your nest egg, your security. You can't just throw it away on some what, Michael? Some dream that doesn't fit your idea of what a 70-year-old woman should want? Amanda recovered first, sliding back into her attorney mode. It's not about age, Mom. It's about risk management. Starting any business is risky. But at Sev, at your point in life, you need stability. Security. What if it fails? What if you get hurt? What if your health? My health is fine. For now. But what happens when it's not? When you need assisted care? Amanda's voice took on the gentle but firm tone she probably used with difficult clients. We've been meaning to talk to you about that. There's a lovely facility in Macon, very well regarded. They have activities, social programs. Activities? The word came out like something distasteful. You want to put me somewhere to make pottery and play bingo until I die? We want you to be safe, Michael said, and realistic. Mom, I'm barely keeping my head above water, with the twins' college tuition and the mortgage. Amanda's going through her divorce. We can't. If something happens to you, if this business thing goes south, we can't bail you out. There it was. The truth beneath their concern. They were worried about their inheritance, about the possibility that they might have to take care of her if she failed. Brenda felt something cold settle in her chest, a weight she hadn't felt since those first lonely months after Harold's death. I see. She closed the folder carefully, her movements deliberate. So you'd rather I sit in my rocking chair, counting my money like some old miser, waiting to die so you can inherit what's left? That's not fair, Amanda protested. We love you. We worry about you, living alone in this big house, with these unrealistic ideas. Unrealistic. Brenda tasted the word, found it bitter. Because I'm too old to have ideas at all. Michael reached across the table, his face earnest. Mom, we're not saying that. We're saying, be practical, enjoy your retirement. Travel. Join the church auxiliary. Find a nice book club. Like Mrs. Henderson down the street? Spending her days watching soap operas and complaining about her arthritis? Brenda shook her head. That's not living, Michael. That's waiting to die. But starting a business at 70. Colonel Sanders was 62 when he franchised KFC. Laura Ingalls Wilder didn't publish her first Little House book until she was 64. Grandma Moses started painting at 78. Brenda's voice grew stronger with each example. Age is just a number, unless you let other people make it a prison. Amanda sighed, the sound filled with professional patience. Mom, those are exceptions. Outliers. Most people your age, most people my age do what their children expect them to do. They shrink themselves down to fit into tiny boxes labeled appropriate and realistic and safe. Brenda stood up, her hands flat on the table. I won't do it. But Mom, no. The word came out with the authority of someone who'd spent decades managing rebellious teenagers. I've listened to your concerns. I've heard your arguments. Now let me tell you something. She looked from Michael to Amanda, seeing them clearly perhaps for the first time in years. Not as her children, but as adults who had somehow learned to fear possibility more than failure. Your father and I raised you to be independent, to chase your dreams, to never let anyone tell you what you couldn't do. I'm disappointed that you've forgotten those lessons. More than that, I'm hurt that you think so little of the woman who taught them to you. Michael's face flushed. We don't think little of you. We just think, you think I'm too old, too fragile, too foolish to make my own decisions. You think I should shuffle off to some nursing home and wait quietly for death, because that's what's expected of someone my age. Brenda picked up the manila folder, holding it against her chest like armor. Well, I have news for you both. I'm not done living yet. I'm not done growing, learning, or building something meaningful. Mom, please. I'm going to transform that Walmart into something amazing. Something that will feed people year-round, create jobs, and show this community what's possible when you stop letting other people's expectations limit your dreams. She looked at each of them in turn. You can support me, or you can keep treating me like a child who doesn't know her own mind, but you won't stop me. The grandfather clock chimed 8 o'clock, marking the end of another Sunday dinner, another failed attempt at family connection. Amanda gathered her purse, her movements sharp with frustration. Michael pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor like an exclamation point. We'll talk about this later, Amanda said, her lawyer voice back in place. When you've had time to think about it rationally. I've been thinking about it for 3 years, Brenda replied. "Every rational thought has led me to the same conclusion. This is what I want to do with the rest of my life." They left without clearing the table, without offering to help with dishes, without the usual kisses goodbye. Brenda stood at her front window, watching their taillights disappear down Maple Street, feeling more alone than she had since Harold's funeral. But as she turned back to her empty dining room, to the cold chicken and congealing gravy, she felt something else stirring beneath the loneliness. Determination. The same steel-backed resolve that had gotten her through her first year of teaching, through Harold's cancer diagnosis, through the long grief of widowhood. They'd laughed at her dreams, dismissed her capabilities, tried to shrink her down to fit their comfortable assumptions about age and appropriate behavior. But they'd also given her something valuable, even if they didn't realize it. They'd given her the fuel she needed to prove them wrong. Brenda's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the dinner plates, the weight of her children's dismissal settling into her bones like winter cold. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung back and forth, marking time that felt suddenly precious, time she couldn't afford to waste on hurt feelings or family approval. She'd spent 3 days since that disastrous Sunday dinner, replaying their words, feeling the sting fresh each time. But this morning, something had shifted. She'd woken before dawn, Harold's voice echoing in her memory. "Brenda, honey, the only approval you need is your own." He'd said that to her 40 years ago when the school board questioned her innovative teaching methods. It had been true then. It was true now. By 8 a.m., she was dressed in her best navy blazer, the one she'd worn to school board meetings when she needed to project authority, and driving toward Athens. The University of Georgia's Agricultural Extension Office had given her Jessica Thompson's contact information 6 months ago, but Brenda had filed it away, thinking she might need a consultant someday. Someday had arrived. The coffee shop Jessica had suggested sat just off the UGA campus, filled with students hunched over laptops and professors grading papers. Brenda felt conspicuously out of place among the 20-somethings, her silver hair and sensible shoes marking her as an outsider. She'd arrived 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table where she could watch the door and review her notes one final time. When Jessica Thompson walked in, Brenda recognized her immediately from the LinkedIn photo. Tall, athletic build, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a Georgia Tech t-shirt that spoke to both her educational background and her casual confidence. But what the photo hadn't captured was the slight slump to her shoulders, the way her eyes swept the room with the wariness of someone who'd been disappointed before. "Mrs. Miller?" Jessica's voice carried a professional politeness that didn't quite mask her curiosity. She slid into the chair across from Brenda, accepting the offered handshake with a grip that spoke of someone used to proving herself in male-dominated spaces. "Thank you for meeting with me," Brenda said, noting how Jessica's eyes flickered over her appearance. Taking in the blazer, the careful makeup, the manila folder positioned precisely beside her coffee cup. "I know this is unusual." Jessica's smile was polite, but guarded. "Your email mentioned vertical farming. I have to admit, I don't get many inquiries from—" She paused, clearly searching for diplomatic phrasing. "From 70-year-old women?" Brenda supplied, amused despite herself. "No, I imagine you don't." A flush crept up Jessica's neck. "I just meant, most of my clients are corporations or young entrepreneurs looking to break into sustainable agriculture. What's your background in farming?" Brenda opened her folder, sliding her certificates across the table. Jessica's eyebrows rose as she examined them, her professional mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine surprise. "Sustainable agriculture from Georgia Southern," Jessica murmured, reading. "Hydroponics certification from Auburn. These are serious programs." "I don't do anything halfway," Brenda said simply. "When I decide to learn something, I learn it properly." Jessica set the certificates down carefully, her posture shifting from polite skepticism to cautious interest. "What made you choose vertical farming? It's not exactly a typical retirement hobby." The question hit deeper than Jessica probably intended. Brenda thought of Michael's dismissive laugh, Amanda's patronizing concern, the way they'd both acted as if her dreams were symptoms of mental decline, rather than expressions of continued vitality. "I spent 45 years in education," Brenda said, her voice steady. "I watched generation after generation of students come through my doors. And you know what I learned? The biggest tragedy isn't when young people fail to achieve their dreams. It's when they stop having dreams at all." She leaned forward slightly. "I refuse to be one of those people who stops dreaming just because society thinks I'm too old to matter." Something shifted in Jessica's expression, surprise giving way to what might have been respect. "Tell me about your vision." Brenda pulled out a hand-drawn site plan, her principal's organizational skills evident in the neat lines and careful annotations. "There's an abandoned Walmart on the outskirts of Millbrook. 48,000 square feet of empty space with excellent infrastructure, loading docks, electrical capacity, climate control capabilities. It's been sitting empty for 2 years." Jessica studied the drawing, her engineering mind clearly engaged. "The building envelope would need serious modifications for optimal growing conditions. Insulation upgrades, specialized HVAC systems, electrical work for the LED arrays." She looked up. "You're talking about a significant investment." $230,000 to start, Brenda said. "My husband's life insurance and 3 years of careful saving." Jessica's pen stopped moving across the paper. That's your life savings." "It's my life's purpose," Brenda corrected. "Money sitting in a bank account doesn't feed people or create jobs or prove that innovation doesn't have an expiration date." For the first time since she'd arrived, Jessica truly smiled. Not the polite, professional expression she'd worn like armor, but something genuine and warm. "My clients usually talk about profit margins and market penetration. You're talking about proving a point." "I'm talking about building something meaningful," Brenda said. "Something that will outlast me. But yes, I suppose I'm also proving a point." She thought of her children's faces, their casual dismissal of her capabilities. "Several points, actually." Jessica leaned back in her chair, studying Brenda with new eyes. "Can I ask you something? Why me? There are established agricultural consulting firms, people with decades of experience in commercial farming operations." Brenda had anticipated this question, had spent sleepless nights considering her answer. "Because you're 29 years old and brilliant, and probably tired of having people dismiss your ideas because of your age. Because you left a corporate job to start your own consulting firm, which tells me you understand the value of taking risks for something you believe in. And because—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because I think we both know what it's like to have people underestimate us." Jessica's laugh was rueful. "You did your homework." "I always do my homework. It's what made me a good principal, and it's what's going to make this business succeed." Brenda gathered her papers, stacking them with the same precision she'd once used to organize lesson plans. "I'm not looking for someone to hold my hand or talk me out of my foolish dreams. I'm looking for a partner who can help me turn those dreams into reality." "A partner?" Jessica's voice carried a note of surprise. 20% equity stake in exchange for your expertise and full commitment to the project," Brenda said, the offer she'd rehearsed a dozen times coming out smooth and confident. "I provide the vision, the funding, and the operational management. You provide the technical expertise and system design. We built something neither of us could create alone." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her coffee cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "My last corporate job, I spent 2 years developing a revolutionary growing system that could reduce water usage by 80% and increase yield by 40%. Management shelved it because they said it was, quote, too innovative for their customer base." "Their loss," Brenda said simply. "I've been struggling to find clients who want true innovation rather than minor tweaks to existing systems. Most people talk big about disrupting agriculture, but when it comes time to actually invest in new technology," Jessica shrugged, "they want safe, proven methods." "I don't want safe," Brenda said. "I want revolutionary. I want people to drive past our facility and stop in their tracks because they've never seen anything like it. I want to prove that age and innovation aren't mutually exclusive, and I want to do it in a way that creates jobs and feeds people and shows this community what's possible when you stop letting other people's limitations become your own." Jessica studied Brenda's face, searching for something. Doubt, maybe, or the kind of naive optimism that crumbled under pressure. Whatever she was looking for, she apparently didn't find it. When do we start? Brenda felt her heart skip a beat. You mean... I've spent the last year trying to convince venture capitalists and agricultural corporations to take a chance on innovation. Maybe it's time I took a chance on someone who's not afraid to dream big. Jessica extended her hand across the table. Partners? Brenda's handshake was firm, decisive, the grip of someone sealing a deal she'd already won in her mind. Partners. But first, I want you to see the building. I want you to stand in that empty space and tell me what you see. When? Now, if you're free. Millbrook's only 20 minutes from here, and I find that big dreams require immediate action. Jessica laughed, a sound of genuine delight. You know what? I like your style, Mrs. Miller. Brenda, she corrected, we're partners now. And partners don't stand on ceremony. As they gathered their things and headed for the door, Brenda felt something she hadn't experienced since Harold's death. The electric thrill of possibility, the sense that her life was expanding rather than contracting. Her children had dismissed her dreams as fantasy, but Jessica Thompson saw them as opportunity. The drive to Millbrook would be the first of many journeys they'd take together, but as Brenda unlocked her car and watched Jessica climb into her own vehicle, she knew this partnership was more than just a business arrangement. It was validation that innovation, ambition, and the courage to dream didn't diminish with age. They just needed the right person to recognize their value. The abandoned Walmart waited for them like a blank canvas, ready to be transformed by two women who refused to let other people's expectations define what was possible. Brenda's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the dinner plates, the weight of her children's dismissal settling into her bones like winter cold. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung back and forth, marking time that felt suddenly precious, time she couldn't afford to waste on hurt feelings or family approval. She'd spent 3 days since that disastrous Sunday dinner replaying their words, feeling the sting fresh each time. But this morning, something had shifted. She'd woken before dawn, Harold's voice echoing in her memory. Brenda, honey, the only approval you need is your own. He'd said that to her 40 years ago, when the school board questioned her innovative teaching methods. It had been true then. It was true now. By 8 a.m., she was dressed in her best navy blazer, the one she'd worn to school board meetings when she needed to project authority, and driving toward Athens. The University of Georgia's Agricultural Extension Office had given her Jessica Thompson's contact information 6 months ago, but Brenda had filed it away, thinking she might need a consultant someday. Someday had arrived. The coffee shop Jessica had suggested sat just off the UGA campus, filled with students hunched over laptops and professors grading papers. Brenda felt conspicuously out of place among the 20-somethings, her silver hair and sensible shoes marking her as an outsider. She'd arrived 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table, where she could watch the door and review her notes one final time. When Jessica Thompson walked in, Brenda recognized her immediately from the LinkedIn photo. Tall, athletic build, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a Georgia Tech t-shirt that spoke to both her educational background and her casual confidence. But what the photo hadn't captured was the slight slump to her shoulders, the way her eyes swept the room with the wariness of someone who'd been disappointed before. Mrs. Miller? Jessica's voice carried a professional politeness that didn't quite mask her curiosity. She slid into the chair across from Brenda, accepting the offered handshake with a grip that spoke of someone used to proving herself in male-dominated spaces. Thank you for meeting with me, Brenda said, noting how Jessica's eyes flickered over her appearance. Taking in the blazer, the careful makeup, the manila folder positioned precisely beside her coffee cup. I know this is unusual. Jessica's smile was polite, but guarded. Your email mentioned vertical farming. I have to admit, I don't get many inquiries from... She paused, clearly searching for diplomatic phrasing. From 70-year-old women? Brenda supplied, amused despite herself. No, I imagine you don't. A flush crept up Jessica's neck. I just meant, Most of my clients are corporations or young entrepreneurs looking to break into sustainable agriculture. What's your background in farming? Brenda opened her folder, sliding her certificates across the table. Jessica's eyebrows rose as she examined them, her professional mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine surprise. Sustainable agriculture from Georgia Southern, Jessica murmured, reading. Hydroponics certification from Auburn. These are serious programs. I don't do anything halfway, Brenda said simply. When I decide to learn something, I learn it properly. Jessica set the certificates down carefully, her posture shifting from polite skepticism to cautious interest. What made you choose vertical farming? It's not exactly a typical retirement hobby. The question hit deeper than Jessica probably intended. Brenda thought of Michael's dismissive laugh, Amanda's patronizing concern, the way they'd both acted as if her dreams were symptoms of mental decline rather than expressions of continued vitality. I spent 45 years in education, Brenda said, her voice steady. I watched generation after generation of students come through my doors. And you know what I learned? The biggest tragedy isn't when young people fail to achieve their dreams. It's when they stop having dreams at all. She leaned forward slightly. I refuse to be one of those people who stops dreaming just because society thinks I'm too old to matter. Something shifted in Jessica's expression, surprise giving way to what might have been respect. Tell me about your vision. Brenda pulled out a hand-drawn site plan, her principal's organizational skills evident in the neat lines and careful annotations. There's an abandoned Walmart on the outskirts of Millbrook, 48,000 square feet of empty space with excellent infrastructure, loading docks, electrical capacity, climate control capabilities. It's been sitting empty for 2 years. Jessica studied the drawing, her engineering mind clearly engaged. The building envelope would need serious modifications for optimal growing conditions. Insulation upgrades, specialized HVAC systems, electrical work for the LED arrays. She looked up. You're talking about a significant investment. $230,000 to start, Brenda said. My husband's life insurance and 3 years of careful saving. Jessica's pen stopped moving across the paper. That's your life savings. It's my life's purpose, Brenda corrected. Money sitting in a bank account doesn't feed people or create jobs or prove that innovation doesn't have an expiration date. For the first time since she'd arrived, Jessica truly smiled. Not the polite, professional expression she'd worn like armor, but something genuine and warm. My clients usually talk about profit margins and market penetration. You're talking about proving a point. I'm talking about building something meaningful, Brenda said. Something that will outlast me. But yes, I suppose I'm also proving a point. She thought of her children's faces, their casual dismissal of her capabilities. Several points, actually. Jessica leaned back in her chair, studying Brenda with new eyes. Can I ask you something? Why me? There are established agricultural consulting firms, people with decades of experience in commercial farming operations. Brenda had anticipated this question, had spent sleepless nights considering her answer. Because you're 29 years old and brilliant, and probably tired of having people dismiss your ideas because of your age. Because you left a corporate job to start your own consulting firm, which tells me you understand the value of taking risks for something you believe in. And because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Because I think we both know what it's like to have people underestimate us. Jessica's laugh was rueful. You did your homework. I always do my homework. It's what made me a good principal. And it's what's going to make this business succeed. Brenda gathered her papers, stacking them with the same precision she'd once used to organize lesson plans. I'm not looking for someone to hold my hand or talk me out of my foolish dreams. I'm looking for a partner who can help me turn those dreams into reality. A partner? Jessica's voice carried a note of surprise. 20% equity stake in exchange for your expertise and full commitment to the project, Brenda said, the offer she'd rehearsed a dozen times, coming out smooth and confident. I provide the vision, the funding, and the operational management. You provide the technical expertise and system design. We build something neither of us could create alone. Jessica was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her coffee cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. My last corporate job, I spent 2 years developing a revolutionary growing system that could reduce water usage by 80% and increase yield by 40%. Management shelved it because they said it was too innovative for their customer base. Their loss, Brenda said simply. I've been struggling to find clients who want true innovation rather than minor tweaks to existing systems. Most people talk big about disrupting agriculture, but when it comes time to actually invest in new technology, Jessica shrugged. They want safe, proven methods. I don't want safe, Brenda said. I want revolutionary. I want people to drive past our facility and stop in their tracks because they've never seen anything like it. I want to prove that age and innovation aren't mutually exclusive, and I want to do it in a way that creates jobs and feeds people and shows this community what's possible when you stop letting other people's limitations become your own. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jessica studied Brenda's face, searching for something, doubt, maybe, or the kind of naive optimism that crumbled under pressure. Whatever she was looking for, she apparently didn't find it. When do we start? Brenda felt her heart skip a beat. You mean? I've spent the last year trying to convince venture capitalists and agricultural corporations to take a chance on innovation. Maybe it's time I took a chance on someone who's not afraid to dream big. Jessica extended her hand across the table. Partners? Brenda's handshake was firm, decisive, the grip of someone sealing a deal she'd already won in her mind. Partners. But first, I want you to see the building. I want you to stand in that empty space and tell me what you see. When? Now, if you're free. Millbrook's only 20 minutes from here, and I find that big dreams require immediate action. Jessica laughed, a sound of genuine delight. You know what? I like your style, Mrs. Miller. Brenda, she corrected, we're partners now, and partners don't stand on ceremony. As they gathered their things and headed for the door, Brenda felt something she hadn't experienced since Harold's death. The electric thrill of possibility, the sense that her life was expanding rather than contracting. Her children had dismissed her dreams as fantasy, but Jessica Thompson saw them as opportunity. The drive to Millbrook would be the first of many journeys they'd take together. But as Brenda unlocked her car and watched Jessica climb into her own vehicle, she knew this partnership was more than just a business arrangement. It was validation that innovation, ambition, and the courage to dream didn't diminish with age. They just needed the right person to recognize their value. The abandoned Walmart loomed ahead of them, its faded blue and white facade a testament to broken promises and failed dreams. As Brenda pulled into the cracked parking lot, she could feel Jessica's eyes on the building, assessing, calculating. The silence stretched between their cars as they both parked near the main entrance, where weeds pushed through the asphalt and graffiti decorated the lower walls. It's bigger than I expected, Jessica called out as she emerged from her Honda Civic, her voice carrying a mix of awe and uncertainty. Brenda stood beside her minivan, keys jingling in her hand as she studied the massive structure. 48,000 square feet of possibility, though she had to admit it looked more like a monument to retail failure than the future of agriculture. Harold used to say that the best diamonds start out looking like worthless rocks. It's all about seeing what could be instead of what is. The front doors were secured with heavy chains and padlocks, but Brenda had come prepared. She produced a key ring from her purse, selecting one that looked far too new and shiny for such a weathered building. How did you get keys? Jessica asked, genuinely curious. Property management company owes me a favor, Brenda said with a slight smile. I helped their daughter get into college when her grades weren't quite there. Sometimes it pays to be a principal in a small town. The lock clicked open with surprising ease, and the chains fell away with a metallic clatter that echoed across the empty parking lot. Brenda pushed open the heavy glass door, and they stepped into what felt like a cathedral of abandonment. The vastness hit them both immediately. The space stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the skeletal remains of checkout lanes and customer service counters. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the high windows, and their footsteps echoed off the polished concrete floors with a hollow resonance that spoke of emptiness and potential in equal measure. "Jesus," Jessica whispered, her voice automatically dropping to match the reverent silence of the space. "It's like an airplane hangar." Brenda walked slowly into the center of the space, her heels clicking against the concrete with the rhythm of someone marking territory. She stopped and turned in a slow circle, her arms spread wide as if she could embrace the entire vision that lived in her mind. "Can you see it?" she asked, her voice carrying the quiet intensity of someone sharing a sacred revelation. The growing towers rising 20 feet high, LED arrays creating perfect growing conditions regardless of weather outside. Climate-controlled environment producing fresh vegetables year-round. Jessica pulled out her phone, activating a measuring app as she began to pace off distances. "The electrical infrastructure is already substantial," she said, her engineering mind engaged. "Walmart needed massive power for all their refrigeration units and lighting. We'd need to upgrade for the LED arrays, but the foundation is there." "What about water?" Brenda asked, following Jessica as she moved through the space with purposeful strides. "Hydroponic systems recycle 90% of their water," Jessica explained, her excitement beginning to match Brenda's vision. "We'd need to install collection and filtration systems, but the water usage would be a fraction of traditional farming. And the yield." She paused, pulling out a notebook and scribbling calculations. "In this space, with proper vertical growing systems, we could produce the equivalent of 60 acres of traditional farmland." Brenda felt her heart racing as the numbers translated into reality. How many people could that feed? Fresh vegetables for probably 15,000 people year-round. More if we focus on high-nutrition crops like leafy greens and herbs. Jessica looked up from her notebook, her eyes bright with possibility. "We could supply every restaurant, grocery store, and school cafeteria within a 50-mile radius." They walked deeper into the space, past the areas where clothing racks had once stood, into what had been the electronics section. Jessica stopped suddenly, pointing upward to the exposed ceiling structure. "Those support beams are perfect for hanging growing systems," she said. "And look at the height. We could stack growing trays 4 levels high without any structural modifications. The air circulation from the existing HVAC system just needs to be reconfigured for optimal plant growth." Brenda followed Jessica's gaze, trying to envision the transformation. Where Jessica saw engineering solutions, Brenda saw something more. She saw purpose. She saw jobs for people in a town where the biggest employer had been the paper mill that closed 5 years ago. She saw fresh food in a community where the nearest grocery store was 30 minutes away and half the produce arrived already wilted. "What about the timeline?" Brenda asked, her principal's mind shifting to project management mode. "How long to get something like this operational?" Jessica walked over to what had been the pharmacy area, her hands trailing along the counter as she thought. Phase 1, basic infrastructure, electrical upgrades, water systems, initial growing towers, probably 4 months if we push hard. We could have our first crops growing within 6 months. She paused, looking around the vast space. Full operation, with all the bells and whistles? 12 to 18 months. And the cost? Your $230,000 will cover phase 1, but barely. For full operation, Jessica's expression grew more serious. We're looking at close to $500,000. Maybe more depending on how sophisticated we want the automation systems to be. Brenda nodded slowly, her mind already working through the problem. We start with phase 1. Prove the concept. Show the community what we're building. Success breeds investment opportunities. They continued their tour, moving into what had been the grocery section. The space felt different here, more intimate, despite the vast ceiling height. Jessica knelt down, running her hands across the concrete floor. The floor drainage is already in place from the meat and dairy sections, she said. Perfect for hydroponic systems. And these freezer units. She stood up, pointing to the abandoned refrigeration infrastructure. We could adapt them for seed starting and climate-sensitive crops. Brenda pulled out her own notebook, the same leather-bound planner she'd used for 45 years of school administration. She began sketching zones and areas, her organizational mind breaking the vast space into manageable sections. Growing areas here and here, she murmured, making notes as she walked. Processing and packaging in the back near the loading docks. Administrative offices up front where customer service used to be. Maybe a demonstration area for educational tours. Educational tours? Jessica looked up from her measurements. This is a small town, Jessica. People are naturally suspicious of new things, especially when those things challenge the way their grandparents farmed. We need to make this accessible, understandable. Let them see how it works, taste the results. Brenda's voice grew stronger as the vision crystallized. Partner with the schools, bring kids through to learn about sustainable agriculture. Show the farmers that this isn't competition, it's complement. Quote, never needed a building to grow food, never needed fancy lights and computer systems. His eyes fixed on Brenda. Thought you were smarter than that, Brenda. Thought all those years of education would teach you the difference between what works and what's just trendy. Brenda felt her spine straighten, the same way it had when parents questioned her judgment, or school board members suggested she was too innovative for her own good. What I learned, Earl, is that the world changes whether we want it to or not. The question is whether we change with it or get left behind. Earl's laugh was short and sharp. Left behind by what? Plastic towers and artificial light? I'll stick with soil and sunshine, thank you very much. And how's that working out for you? The words came out sharper than Brenda intended, but she didn't take them back. How many family farms have closed in this county in the last 10 years? How many young people have left because there's no future in traditional agriculture as it stands now? Earl's face darkened. That's got nothing to do with farming methods, and everything to do with government regulations and corporate competition. Maybe, Brenda conceded, but this isn't about replacing traditional farming. It's about expanding it, giving people more options, creating more opportunities. Creating opportunities for outsiders to come in and tell us how we should be doing things we've been doing for generations. Earl shot back, his gaze moving pointedly to Jessica. No offense, miss, but this is our community, our land, our way of life. Jessica's voice remained calm, but Brenda could see the tension in her shoulders. I'm not trying to change anyone's way of life. I'm just offering tools and techniques that might help. Help who? Earl interrupted. Help some corporation come in and undercut local farmers with cheaper produce grown in a factory? Help put more family farms out of business? Brenda stepped between them, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to mediating conflicts. Earl, I respect your concerns, and I respect your experience, but I'm not some outside corporation. I'm Brenda Miller. I've lived in this community for 50 years, taught 3 generations of local children, including your grandson Tyler. If anyone has earned the right to try something new here, I think it's me. Earl was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from Brenda to the building behind her. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less firm. Just because you have the right doesn't mean you should exercise it. Some things are worth preserving, Brenda. Some traditions matter. I agree, Brenda said, but I also believe some innovations matter too. And I believe this community is strong enough to embrace both. Earl climbed back into his truck, but before driving away, he rolled down his window. We'll see about that, he said. But don't expect everyone to welcome this with open arms. Change isn't always progress, no matter how fancy you dress it up. As Earl's truck disappeared down the road, Jessica let out a long breath. Well, that was fun. Brenda watched the dust settle, her mind already working through the implications of the encounter. That was a warning, she said quietly. Earl Johnson doesn't make idle threats, and he has more influence in this community than people realize. Are you worried? Brenda looked back at the building that would soon house their dreams, then at Jessica's determined expression. I'm prepared, she said finally. There's a difference. The sun was setting as they locked up the building and prepared to return to their cars. The vast space behind them held the echo of their voices, their dreams, and their shared vision of transformation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles, new people who needed convincing. But tonight, as Brenda drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the electric anticipation of being on the verge of something extraordinary. The building was just the beginning. The real work, the real test, lay ahead in convincing a community that innovation and tradition could coexist, that age was no barrier to ambition, and that sometimes the most important dreams were the ones that seemed impossible. The abandoned Walmart had shown them its secrets, revealed its potential. Now it was time to show the world what two determined women could build when they refused to let other people's limitations define their own possibilities. The Farm Bureau meeting room hadn't seen this many people since the drought of 2019. Big Earl Johnson surveyed the packed crowd from behind the folding table that served as his makeshift podium, his weathered hands gripping a coffee-stained gavel like a weapon. At 65, he still commanded respect in Millbrook's agricultural community, his fourth-generation farming credentials and county commissioner position lending weight to his words. "Y'all know why we're here," Earl began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd spent decades speaking over farm equipment and arguing with bureaucrats. "We got ourselves a situation that threatens everything our families have built in this county." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brenda Miller's vertical farming project had been the talk of every coffee shop, barber shop, and church pew for the past 2 weeks. The abandoned Walmart, which had sat empty for 5 years like a monument to economic decline, suddenly buzzed with activity as contractors measured and engineers consulted blueprints. "Now, I got nothing personal against Brenda Miller," Earl continued, though his tone suggested otherwise. "She was a fine principal, did right by our kids for all those years. But this fool notion of hers about indoor farming, it's not just misguided, it's dangerous." From the back of the room, Tyler Johnson shifted uncomfortably in his folding chair. At 19, he was the youngest person present, home from the University of Georgia for spring break. His grandfather's words settled in his stomach like stones, each one building a wall between what his family expected and what his environmental science classes had taught him about sustainable agriculture. "How's it dangerous, Earl?" called out Martha Henderson, whose family had run the local feed store for 3 generations. "Seems like more agriculture would be good for business." Earl's jaw tightened. He'd anticipated this question, prepared for the doubters in his own community. Jessica's smile was slow but genuine. "You really have thought of everything, haven't you?" "Not everything. That's why I need a partner who understands the technology." Brenda walked over to where Jessica stood near a bank of windows. "But I understand communities. I know that the biggest barrier to innovation isn't technical. It's cultural. People have to believe in something before they'll support it." They spent the next hour walking through every section of the building, Jessica calling out technical requirements while Brenda made notes about workflow and community integration. As the afternoon sun shifted, casting long shadows through the high windows, their separate visions began to merge into something cohesive and powerful. "You know what the best part is?" Jessica said as they stood near what would become the main entrance to their facility. "This building was designed to bring a community together around commerce. We're going to bring it together around growth, literal growth, sustainable growth, community growth." Brenda felt tears pricking at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming rightness of the moment. "Harold would have loved this," she said quietly. "He always said the best way to honor the past was to build something better for the future." They were preparing to leave when the sound of a pickup truck pulling into the parking lot caught their attention. Through the windows, they could see an older man in overalls climbing out of a battered Ford, his expression curious but wary. "That's Earl Johnson," Brenda said, recognizing the local Farm Bureau president. "I suspect our little tour hasn't gone unnoticed." Jessica followed Brenda toward the doors. "Is that a problem?" "Probably," Brenda said with a rueful smile. "Earl's been farming the same way his father and grandfather did. Change isn't his favorite thing." They emerged from the building to find Earl standing near his truck, his weathered hands shoved deep in his pockets. His eyes moved from Brenda to Jessica to the open doors of the Walmart, clearly trying to piece together what he'd stumbled upon. "Afternoon, Earl," Brenda called out. her voice carrying the friendly authority she'd perfected over decades of dealing with difficult parents and school board members. "Brenda," Earl nodded, his tone carefully neutral. "Heard you were poking around the old store. Mind if I ask what you're up to?" "Planning," Brenda said simply. "Jessica here is an agricultural engineer. We're exploring possibilities for the space." Earl's gaze shifted to Jessica, taking in her youth and her notebook filled with technical diagrams. "What kind of possibilities?" Jessica stepped forward, her voice professional but warm. "Vertical farming, sustainable agriculture designed to complement traditional farming, while providing year-round fresh produce for the local community." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Earl's expression didn't change, but Brenda could see the wheels turning behind his eyes, the same look she'd seen on countless faces when she'd introduced new teaching methods or technology to her school. "Indoor farming," Earl said finally, his tone suggesting he'd tasted something unpleasant. "In a Walmart." "It's not as unusual as it sounds," Jessica began, but Earl was already shaking his head. "Nothing usual about it at all," he said. "Been farming this valley for 40 years, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. Because it ain't real agriculture, Martha. It's some laboratory experiment dreamed up by college kids who never had dirt under their fingernails. You think those fancy LED lights and hydroponic whatnots are gonna compete with God's own soil and sunshine?" He gestured toward the window, where neat rows of cotton fields stretched toward the horizon. "My great-granddaddy cleared this land with mules and determination. My granddaddy survived the Depression by knowing every inch of dirt on this farm. My daddy fought drought and flood and government interference to keep this operation running. And now some retired schoolteacher thinks she can do better with a bunch of plastic pipes and artificial light?" The crowd murmured approval, but Tyler noticed the murmurs weren't as unanimous as they might have been a decade ago. Farming had gotten harder, profits thinner, weather more unpredictable. Some of the older farmers looked skeptical of Earl's arguments, their own struggles making them less certain about traditional methods. "What really worries me," Earl continued, warming to his theme, "is what happens when her little experiment fails. And it will fail, mark my words. She'll lose her shirt, maybe file for bankruptcy, and that building will sit empty again. But the damage will be done. Y'all seen what happens when outside money comes in with big promises. Remember when that solar company tried to lease half the Henderson place? Promised the moon, delivered lawsuits." Tyler wanted to speak up, to mention the studies he'd read about vertical farming's water efficiency and year-round production capabilities, but the weight of family expectation kept him silent. 3 generations of Johnson farmers staring down at him from faded photographs on his grandfather's mantle. "There's another problem," Earl said, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "This ain't just about farming, it's about what kind of community we want to be. Are we going to honor the traditions that built this place, or are we going to chase every newfangled idea that comes along?" He pulled out a folder, mimicking Brenda's gesture from her own family dinner weeks earlier. "I done my research too. This vertical farming business, it's all about automation, robots, computer controls. You know what that means? No need for farmhands, no seasonal labor, no connection to the land. It's farming without farmers." The accusation hit home. Many in the room depended on agricultural work, either directly or through businesses that serve the farming community. The idea of technology replacing human labor struck at their deepest fears about obsolescence. "Plus," Earl continued, "you think this is going to stop with vegetables? She's got backing from somewhere. Nobody starts this kind of operation on a teacher's pension. Once outside investors get a foothold, they'll be looking to expand, to push out local operations that can't compete with their fancy equipment and deep pockets." Tyler's phone buzzed with a text from his roommate at UGA, a link to an article about vertical farms reducing pesticide use and conserving water. He stared at the screen, torn between loyalty to his grandfather and the knowledge he'd gained in his environmental science courses. The irony wasn't lost on him. Earl was arguing against innovation while Tyler's generation would inherit the consequences of climate change and resource depletion. "What do you propose we do about it?" asked Jim Crawford, whose family farm had been struggling since commodity prices collapsed. His question carried a note of genuine uncertainty rather than Earl's aggressive certainty. "We make sure the proper authorities understand our concerns," Earl replied smoothly. "Zoning regulations exist for a reason. Environmental impact studies need to be thorough. Safety inspections need to be comprehensive. We got every right to ensure this project meets the highest standards before it disrupts our community." Translation: bureaucratic warfare. Tyler understood his grandfather's strategy. Use regulatory requirements and permit processes to delay and complicate Brenda's project until she ran out of money or patience. It was the same tactic Earl had used against the solar company and the wind farm proposal before that. "I've already spoken with the County Planning Commission," Earl continued. "They're reviewing the zoning application with extra care, making sure every I is dotted and every T is crossed. Agricultural use permits require certain standards, and we need to verify this project actually qualifies." The room buzzed with approval. Legal challenges felt safer than direct confrontation, more civilized than the kind of outright opposition that might make them look unreasonable. Tyler watched his grandfather work the crowd, building consensus through shared fears and community solidarity. "There's one more thing," Earl said, his voice carrying a note of regret that Tyler recognized as carefully calculated. "This whole situation puts us in an awkward position with someone we all respect. Brenda Miller taught most of our kids, and nobody questions her dedication to this community. But good intentions don't guarantee good outcomes." He paused, letting the weight of apparent reasonableness settle over the room. "We need to be prepared for the possibility that we'll have to take a stand against this project, even if it means disappointing someone we care about. Sometimes being a good neighbor means saying no to something that could hurt the whole community." The murmurs of agreement were stronger now, Earl's carefully crafted message hitting its mark. Tyler felt sick, watching his grandfather manipulate genuine community concerns into opposition against innovation that could actually help address the challenges facing modern agriculture. After the meeting ended and the crowd dispersed into the parking lot, Tyler lingered, helping stack chairs and avoid conversation. Earl approached him, satisfaction evident in his weathered features. "Good turnout tonight," his grandfather said. "Important for young folks like you to understand how these things work, how a community protects itself." "Granddad," Tyler began carefully, "what if she's right? What if this vertical farming could actually work?" Earl's expression hardened. "Boy, you've been up at that university too long, filling your head with theories instead of facts. Farming ain't something you learn from books. It's something you earn with your hands and your back and your commitment to the land. But the environmental benefits. The environment's been just fine for 4 generations of Johnson farmers," Earl cut him off. "Don't let some college professors convince you that everything your family built is wrong." Tyler nodded, the expected response, but his mind churned with contradictions. His environmental science professors weren't trying to tear down agriculture. They were trying to help it survive the challenges of climate change, water scarcity, and soil depletion. The vertical farming techniques Brenda was proposing addressed real problems that traditional farming struggled with. That night, alone in his childhood bedroom, Tyler stared at the ceiling and wrestled with divided loyalties. His laptop sat open beside him, displaying research about sustainable agriculture practices, water conservation, and food security. Everything he'd learned suggested that innovation like Brenda's project wasn't the enemy of traditional farming. It was potentially its salvation. But across the hall, his grandfather's bedroom held 4 generations of Johnson family farming legacy, framed certificates from the Farm Bureau, and photographs of land that had fed families for over a century. The weight of that history pressed down on Tyler like a physical force. His phone buzzed with another text from his roommate. "Saw the news about that vertical farm in your hometown. Pretty cool that someone's trying innovative agriculture in rural Georgia. Maybe you could intern there this summer?" Tyler stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. An internship with Brenda Miller's project would give him hands-on experience with cutting-edge agricultural technology, the kind of real-world application his professors always encouraged. It would also be the ultimate betrayal of his family's expectations. He closed the laptop without responding to the text, but sleep didn't come easily. Outside his window, the Johnson family farm stretched toward the horizon, neat rows of cotton waiting for spring planting. Somewhere across town, Brenda Miller was probably awake too, planning the transformation of an abandoned building into something that might represent the future of agriculture. Tyler Johnson lay caught between past and future, family loyalty and personal conviction, tradition and innovation. He didn't know it yet, but his internal struggle mirrored the larger battle developing in Millbrook, a community wrestling with change, progress, and the courage required to embrace new possibilities. In the morning, Earl would begin making phone calls to county officials, arranging visits to the zoning office, organizing the bureaucratic resistance that could strangle Brenda's project in red tape. But tonight his grandson stared at the ceiling and wondered if fighting the future was really the best way to honor the past. The battle lines were drawn, not just between competing visions of agriculture, but between generations, between fear and hope, between the safety of tradition and the risk of transformation. And in the center of it all, a 70-year-old former principal, prepared to fight for her dream against a community that had decided she was too old to have one. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp and official, bearing the letterhead of Hartwell and Associates Agricultural Equipment. Michael Miller stared at it for a full minute before his trembling fingers managed to tear open the envelope. 22 years of dedicated service, Regional Sales Manager of the Year 3 times running, and it all came down to 2 paragraphs of corporate speak about restructuring, market optimization, and difficult decisions. Effective immediately. Severance package. Best wishes for future endeavors. He sat in his empty cubicle. They'd given him 15 minutes to clear out his desk, and felt the walls of his carefully constructed life crumbling around him. The twins' college tuition bills sat unpaid on his kitchen counter. The mortgage on his suburban Atlanta house had already been refinanced twice. His divorce settlement required monthly payments that assumed a 6-figure salary he no longer had. At 48, Michael Miller was officially obsolete. The irony wasn't lost on him. For weeks, he'd been telling his 70-year-old mother that she was too old to start over, that business was too risky for someone her age, that she should accept her limitations and settle into quiet retirement. Now he sat in his car in a corporate parking lot, his own career in ruins, facing the terrifying prospect of starting over himself. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife. Tuition payment is late. Again. Tyler Johnson lay caught between past and future, family loyalty and personal conviction, tradition and innovation. He didn't know it yet, but his internal struggle mirrored the larger battle developing in Millbrook, a community wrestling with change, progress, and the courage required to embrace new possibilities. In the morning, Earl would begin making phone calls to county officials, arranging visits to the zoning office, organizing the bureaucratic resistance that could strangle Brenda's project in red tape. But tonight his grandson stared at the ceiling and wondered if fighting the future was really the best way to honor the past. The battle lines were drawn, not just between competing visions of agriculture, but between generations, between fear and hope, between the safety of tradition and the risk of transformation. And in the center of it all, a 70-year-old former principal, prepared to fight for her dream against a community that had decided she was too old to have one. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp and official, bearing the letterhead of Hartwell and Associates Agricultural Equipment. Michael Miller stared at it for a full minute before his trembling fingers managed to tear open the envelope. 22 years of dedicated service, Regional Sales Manager of the Year 3 times running, and it all came down to 2 paragraphs of corporate speak about restructuring, market optimization, and difficult decisions. Effective immediately. Severance package. Best wishes for future endeavors. He sat in his empty cubicle. They'd given him 15 minutes to clear out his desk, and felt the walls of his carefully constructed life crumbling around him. The twins' college tuition bills sat unpaid on his kitchen counter. The mortgage on his suburban Atlanta house had already been refinanced twice. His divorce settlement required monthly payments that assumed a 6-figure salary he no longer had. At 48, Michael Miller was officially obsolete. The irony wasn't lost on him. For weeks, he'd been telling his 70-year-old mother that she was too old to start over, that business was too risky for someone her age, that she should accept her limitations and settle into quiet retirement. Now he sat in his car in a corporate parking lot, his own career in ruins, facing the terrifying prospect of starting over himself. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife. Tuition payment is late. Again. The girls are asking questions. Michael closed his eyes and tried to remember when everything had started falling apart. Was it when Jennifer filed for divorce 2 years ago, citing his obsession with work and emotional unavailability? Was it when he'd stopped believing in the agricultural equipment he was selling, watching small farmers go under while corporate operations swallowed their land? Or was it earlier, when he'd looked at his vibrant, accomplished mother and seen only an aging woman whose dreams were inconvenient embarrassments? 2 hours later, he stood in Amanda's gleaming Atlanta law office, watching his sister pace behind her mahogany desk like a caged predator. Even in crisis, Amanda projected the polished competence that had made her a partner at one of the city's most prestigious firms. Her hair was perfect, her suit immaculate, her expression carefully controlled. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Amanda said, her voice tight with barely contained frustration. "Mom's lost her mind, and now you've lost your job. I'm the only one left holding this family together." Michael wanted to point out that Amanda's own marriage had collapsed 6 months ago, that her custody battle with her investment banker ex-husband was splashed across the society pages, that her holding the family together mostly consisted of writing checks and avoiding uncomfortable conversations. But he needed her help too much to pick a fight. "The severance will last 3 months," he said instead. "Maybe 4 if I'm careful. But after that, you'll have to ask Mom for help," Amanda finished, her tone making it clear how she felt about that prospect. "The same woman who's throwing away her life savings on some agricultural fantasy. Do you see how insane this has become?" She turned to face the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of downtown Atlanta. Even from the 40th floor, Amanda felt exposed, vulnerable in ways she'd never experienced. Her separation from David had been messy and public, her professional reputation suffering from the whispered speculation about their failed marriage. The last thing she needed was her mother making headlines as the eccentric old lady who tried to become a farmer. "I talked to the partners yesterday," Amanda continued, her voice carefully neutral, "about the Peterson merger. Apparently the clients have concerns about my stability, my ability to maintain focus during personal difficulties." Michael understood the subtext. In Amanda's world, image was everything. Professional success depended on projecting competence, reliability, and unshakable confidence. Having a mother who was making what looked like irrational business decisions reflected poorly on Amanda's judgment and family stability. "So we stop her," Michael said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "We talk to the bank, maybe challenge her mental competency." "You want to have our mother declared incompetent?" Amanda spun around, her composure cracking slightly. "Michael, she's not senile, she's not confused, she's just stubborn. And apparently she's been planning this for years." They'd both underestimated their mother, Michael realized. The detailed research, the financial planning, the careful preparation, none of it suggested someone making impulsive decisions. It suggested someone who'd been thinking and planning while they'd been dismissing her as a harmless old lady. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked. "I don't know," Amanda admitted, and the uncertainty in her voice was more frightening than her anger. Amanda always had a plan, always knew the right legal strategy or negotiation tactic. Hearing her admit confusion felt like watching the last stable foundation crumble. They sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own financial and emotional calculations. Outside, Atlanta pulsed with ambition and energy, the kind of dynamic urban environment that had drawn them both away from rural Georgia decades ago. Now that sophisticated world felt less like an achievement and more like a trap. "Maybe we should go see her," Michael said finally. "Talk to her again. Explain the situation." "You mean explain that her successful children are both disasters who need her help?" Amanda's laugh was bitter. "The same woman we told she was too old and confused to make her own decisions? I'm sure that conversation will go well." But they both knew they didn't have a choice. Pride was a luxury neither of them could afford anymore. The drive to Millbrook took 2 hours. Time enough for Michael to rehearse apologies he wasn't sure he meant, and for Amanda to practice swallowing the pride that had sustained her through law school, partnership track, and every professional challenge she'd faced. The irony of their situation wasn't lost on either of them. They were going home to ask for help from the woman they'd tried to pack off to assisted living just weeks earlier. Brenda's house looked smaller than they remembered, more modest and somehow more substantial at the same time. The garden showed signs of recent attention, and construction equipment was visible in the distance where the old Walmart was being transformed. Their mother's dream was taking physical form, while their own lives fell apart. Brenda answered the door with dirt under her fingernails, and a satisfied expression that faded when she saw their faces. She'd been expecting this visit, Michael realized. Probably had been since the day they'd dismissed her plans as unrealistic fantasy. "Well," she said, stepping aside to let them in. "This is a surprise." The living room felt different somehow, less like a shrine to the past and more like the headquarters of someone planning for the future. Agricultural journals were stacked on the coffee table, and a laptop computer. When had their mother gotten a laptop? Sat open with what looked like architectural plans displayed on the screen. "Mom," Michael began, then stopped. "How did you tell your mother that everything you'd said about responsibility and realistic expectations had been wrong? How did you admit that the child was coming to the parent for rescue?" "You lost your job," Brenda said simply. Michael nodded, surprised by her directness. 3 weeks ago. Downsizing. 22 years, and they gave me 15 minutes to clean out my desk. "And your custody hearing is next month," she continued, looking at Amanda. "David's using your travel schedule and work hours against you, claiming you're an absent mother." Amanda's composure cracked. "How did you—" "I read the newspaper," Brenda said dryly. "Society page might not be hard news, but it covers the important divorces. Plus, Washington's daughter works at the courthouse. Small towns have their advantages." The casual way she'd been monitoring their lives while they'd been dismissing hers felt like another small betrayal. She'd known about their struggles, their failures, their growing desperation, and she'd said nothing during their lecture about her unrealistic dreams. "I suppose you think this proves your point," Amanda said, her lawyer's instincts kicking in even in defeat. "That we're hypocrites for questioning your judgment. I think it proves that life is unpredictable," Brenda replied. "That success can disappear overnight. That the things we think make us secure can vanish without warning. It's why I decided to stop waiting for permission to live my life." She moved to the window, looking out toward the construction site that represented her future. "It also proves that my children are human beings with problems and challenges, just like everyone else. That doesn't make you hypocrites. It makes you my children." The gentleness in her voice was harder to bear than anger would have been. Michael felt tears threatening, the kind of emotional breakdown he hadn't experienced since his divorce was finalized. "I need help, Mom," he said quietly. "The severance won't last long, and I've got payments. Obligations." "I know," she said. "And I need someone the girls can stay with this summer," Amanda added, her professional mask finally slipping entirely. "David's threatening to use any childcare arrangements against me. Claims I'm pawning them off on strangers instead of being a real mother. I know that too." They sat in silence, 3 generations of pride and disappointment and love tangled up in the modest living room where they'd celebrated birthdays and Christmas mornings and high school graduations. The distance between them felt both vast and fragile, like something that could be bridged with the right words or destroyed completely with the wrong ones. "I have a proposition," Brenda said finally. "Michael, I need someone to handle the business side of this operation. Contracts, vendor relations, marketing. Someone who understands agriculture and has sales experience. The pay wouldn't be what you're used to, but it would be steady, and there's potential for growth if the business succeeds." Michael stared at her, processing the offer. Working for his mother. The woman he'd told was too old to understand modern business. The irony was almost too perfect. "And Amanda," Brenda continued, "I need legal counsel. Someone who understands corporate structure, contract law, regulatory compliance. I can't afford your hourly rate, but I could offer equity in the company. Plus, the girls would love spending summer here. Dot's granddaughter is their age, and this place could use some young energy." Amanda's laugh was slightly hysterical. You're offering us jobs? After we told you this whole thing was insane? I'm offering you a chance to be part of something, Brenda corrected. Something that might succeed or might fail, but either way, it's ours. Family business. 3 generations working together instead of apart. The offer hung between them like a lifeline, thrown across turbulent water. Michael thought about his empty suburban house, the mounting bills, the humiliation of unemployment at 48. Amanda thought about her daughters asking why Daddy didn't live with them anymore. About partnership meetings where her colleagues whispered about her personal instability. Why? Michael asked. After everything we said. Because you're my children, Brenda said simply. Because I love you even when you're being idiots. And because this project is too big for one person, even one very determined 70-year-old person. She turned back to them, her expression serious. But I need to be clear about something. This is my company, my vision, my risk. If you come work for me, you work for me. No more lectures about what's realistic for someone my age. No more suggestions about assisted living. No more treating me like I'm too old to know my own mind. The conditions were fair, Michael realized. More than fair, considering their alternatives. But accepting meant admitting they'd been wrong about everything. Their mother's capabilities, their own security, the assumption that age automatically meant decline. I'll think about it, Amanda said finally. Me too, Michael added. But they both knew they'd already decided. Pride was expensive, and neither of them could afford it anymore. Sometimes the child had to become the employee. The critic had to become the supporter. The one who'd dismissed dreams had to learn to believe in them. Outside, the sun was setting over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the abandoned Walmart that was slowly transforming into something unprecedented. In a few weeks, it would be full of growing plants and innovative technology, a testament to the power of dreams pursued regardless of age or expectations. And if things worked out, it would also be full of family. 3 generations of Millers learning to work together, to support each other's dreams instead of dismissing them, to understand that starting over wasn't a sign of failure, but a mark of courage. The fractures were deep, but they weren't irreparable. Show me, she said, accepting the tablet from Jessica's eager hands. The data scrolled past in neat columns. Vitamin content, mineral absorption rates, pesticide residue results that showed nothing but zeros. This is remarkable, Jess. We're not just matching traditional farming, we're exceeding it. Tyler looked up from his work, soil-free lettuce roots dripping with nutrient solution. My grandfather's been getting reports from his farming contacts. Word spreading about what we're producing here. Restaurants in Atlanta are calling us directly now, bypassing the usual distribution chains. The mention of Big Earl sent a familiar tightness through Brenda's chest. The man's opposition had evolved from vocal protests to calculated legal challenges over the past months. Every permit had been contested, every inspection scheduled with suspicious frequency. Earl Johnson wasn't just fighting innovation, he was fighting the erosion of a world where his opinion carried weight. Speaking of your grandfather, Brenda said carefully, how are things at home? Tyler's hands stilled on the nutrient lines. At 19, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd found purpose early. But the shadows around his eyes spoke to the cost of his choices. He's not speaking to me, hasn't since I took this job. Mama tries to keep the peace but Sunday dinners. He shrugged, attempting casualness that didn't quite land. I eat a lot of meals alone these days. The weight of that confession settled between them. Brenda knew something about family meals poisoned by disappointment, about the particular ache of being dismissed by the people who should understand you best. I'm sorry, she said simply. I know what it's like to have family question your choices. But you were right, Tyler replied, his voice gaining strength. Look at this place. Look at what we're building. How can he not see? Because seeing would mean admitting he was wrong, Jessica interrupted, her tone carrying the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd navigated her own family's skepticism. And some people would rather be right than happy. The electronic chime of the facility's communication system interrupted their conversation. Brenda recognized the specific tone. Someone at the main entrance, probably another journalist or potential investor, drawn by the growing media attention. The success of Greenrise had attracted notice from agricultural magazines, sustainability advocates, and venture capital firms looking for the next breakthrough in farming technology. "I'll handle it," Tyler offered, but Brenda was already moving toward the front office. "Let me guess," she said into the intercom. "Another reporter wanting to write about the grandmother who thinks she can farm? Actually, it's your son." The voice was uncertain, younger. Probably Maria. The new receptionist, Jessica, had insisted they hire to manage the increasing volume of calls and visitors. "Michael Miller?" "He says it's urgent." Brenda's finger hesitated over the release button. Michael hadn't set foot on the property since that disastrous family dinner months ago, despite living less than 20 miles away. That's human nature, but fear isn't faith, and suspicion isn't wisdom. After the service, Tyler lingered in the parking lot, watching Earl shake hands with departing parishioners, his smile strained and his conversation clipped. Pastor Bill's words had undermined weeks of careful coalition building, and Tyler could see his grandfather struggling to maintain his composure. "Granddad?" Tyler began carefully. "Maybe we should." "Don't," Earl cut him off. "Not here, not now." That afternoon, Tyler made his decision. The envelope in his backpack felt like it weighed 100 pounds as he walked the 3 miles from his grandfather's farm to Brenda Miller's house. Each step took him further from his family's expectations and closer to a future he couldn't fully envision. Brenda answered the door in work clothes, her gray hair pulled back, and her hands stained with what looked like soil. Behind her, Tyler could see the organized chaos of a project in full swing. Architectural plans spread across the dining room table, agricultural equipment catalogs stacked on chairs, and a laptop displaying what appeared to be growth charts. "Tyler Johnson," she said, recognizing him immediately. "Earl's grandson." "Yes, ma'am." He held out the envelope, his hand trembling slightly. "I'd like to apply for a job." Brenda took the envelope but didn't open it immediately. Instead, she studied his face, seeing something there that made her step aside and gesture him into the house. "Does your grandfather know you're here?" she asked. "No, ma'am, and I'd appreciate if you didn't tell him. At least not yet." She nodded, understanding the complexity of his situation. Small-town family dynamics were delicate things, especially when they involved public disagreements and wounded pride. "What's your major at Georgia?" she asked, settling into her favorite chair and finally opening his application. "Environmental science, with a focus on sustainable agriculture." The words came out in a rush. "I've been studying vertical farming systems, water conservation, soilless growing mediums. I know it might seem like I'm betraying my family, but I think what you're doing could help traditional farmers too." Brenda read through his application carefully. His grades were excellent, his references strong, and his essay about sustainable agriculture showed both knowledge and passion. More importantly, she could see the courage it had taken for him to come here. "Your grandfather organized that Farm Bureau meeting," she said, "made his feelings about my project pretty clear." "Yes, ma'am, but with respect, I think he's wrong." Tyler's voice grew stronger as he found his conviction. "Climate change is real. Water scarcity is real. Traditional farming methods are going to have to adapt or die. What you're doing isn't competing with family farms. It's showing them one possible future." Brenda smiled, recognizing something of herself in this young man's determination to pursue his convictions despite family pressure. "When can you start?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Tyler understood that accepting this job would irrevocably change his relationship with his grandfather, possibly with his entire family. But staying silent, pretending to agree with Earl's opposition, felt like betraying everything he'd learned about environmental responsibility and agricultural innovation. "Tomorrow," he said. As Tyler walked home in the fading afternoon light, he felt the weight of his decision settling over him like a mantle. By accepting Brenda's offer, he'd chosen his future over his past, innovation over tradition, personal conviction over family loyalty. It was the kind of choice that would define not just his career but his character. He didn't know that Earl was already planning his next move, a series of regulatory challenges that would test Brenda's resolve and the community's patience. He didn't know that his own defection would push his grandfather toward increasingly desperate measures. He only knew that some bridges had to be burned to reach the other side. The future was waiting, and Tyler Johnson had chosen to meet it head-on. The morning sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Greenrise Vertical Farms, illuminating towers of lettuce that seemed to glow like emeralds in their hydroponic cradles. Brenda stood on the elevated walkway Jessica had designed, watching Tyler Johnson adjust the nutrient flow to the arugula beds with the careful precision of someone who'd found his calling. 6 months of operation, and the facility hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-orchestrated symphony. "Mrs. Miller, you need to see this." Jessica's voice carried across the growing floor, excitement barely contained. She stood near the harvest station, tablet in hand, surrounded by crates of produce that would be loaded onto trucks within the hour. The test results from the university came back. "Our nutritional density numbers are off the charts, 40% higher than field-grown equivalents." Brenda made her way down the metal stairs, her hand trailing along the railing Harold had insisted on installing in their home during his final months. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd needed the support more in those grief-stricken first years than she did now, surrounded by the tangible proof of her capabilities. His silence had been pointed, deliberate, a statement about his disapproval that cut deeper than his sister's more obvious disdain. "Send him back to the office," she said finally. The walk from the growing floor to her office felt longer than usual, past the employee break room, where shift workers grabbed coffee between harvests, past the loading dock where trucks waited for their daily delivery of produce that would reach restaurant tables by evening. Everything she'd built, everything she'd proved, and still her son's arrival made her stomach clench with old anxieties. Michael stood with his back to her when she entered, studying the wall of certificates and awards that had accumulated with surprising speed. Agricultural Innovation Awards, sustainability recognitions, a letter of commendation from the Georgia Department of Agriculture. His shoulders had a defeated slump she didn't remember, his usually perfect posture compromised by something that went deeper than physical fatigue. "Impressive," he said without turning around. "I saw the article in Southern Agriculture Monthly. Revolutionary vertical farm transforms rural Georgia community. They quoted you extensively. Your tone suggests you disapprove." He turned then, and Brenda saw what the past months had cost him. The confidence that had defined Michael Miller, regional sales manager, had been stripped away, leaving behind a man who looked older than his 48 years. His clothes hung differently, less carefully tailored, and there was a tremor in his hands that had nothing to do with medical conditions. "I lost my job," he said simply. 3 weeks ago. Company restructuring. 22 years of service, and they gave me a severance package and an hour to clean out my desk." The words hung between them like a confession. Brenda felt the familiar pull of maternal instinct, the urge to comfort, to offer solutions, to smooth over the hurt in her child's eyes. But underneath ran a current of something else, something that tasted like vindication mixed with guilt. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it despite everything. "I know how much that job meant to you." "Did you?" His laugh held no humor. "Because I'm starting to think I didn't know what it meant to me. Turns out when you spend 20 years selling other people's innovations, you don't build much of value for yourself." He moved to the window that overlooked the growing floor, where Tyler was training 2 new employees on the automated seeding system. The young man's enthusiasm was visible even from this distance, his gestures animated as he explained the delicate balance of nutrients and light that produced their exceptional crops. "I used to think he was naive," Michael continued. "Tyler, I mean. All that talk about sustainable farming, environmental responsibility. I thought he'd grow out of it, realize that business is about profit margins and quarterly reports." He paused, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. "But watching him work down there, he's not naive. He's just not cynical yet." "Cynicism isn't wisdom," Brenda said quietly. "It's just disappointment dressed up as sophistication." Michael's shoulders tightened. "Is that what you think of me? That I'm cynical? I think you're scared." The words came out more gently than she'd intended, carrying the weight of maternal observation honed by decades of recognizing fear beneath teenage bravado. You've built your identity around a job that valued you for your ability to sell other people's ideas. Now that job's gone, and you're questioning everything you thought you knew about success. Don't analyze me, Mama. But the protest lacked heat, sounded more like exhaustion than anger. Then don't come here looking for absolution. Brenda moved to stand beside him at the window, close enough to smell the expensive cologne that no longer masked the scent of desperate worry. If you want something from me, ask for it directly. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant hum of circulation pumps and growing lights. Below, Tyler had moved on to demonstrating the harvest protocols, his students taking careful notes as he explained the importance of timing and technique. I need a job, Michael said finally, the words stripped of pride or pretense. Not just any job, I need purpose, I guess, something that matters. And you think you'll find that here? I don't know. He turned to face her, and she saw the vulnerability he'd been hiding behind professional competence for years. But I'm starting to think maybe you were right. Maybe age isn't about giving up. Maybe it's about finally being brave enough to try something that matters. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Brenda studied her son's face, looking for signs of manipulation or desperation disguised as sincerity. What she found instead was something she recognized, the same hollow ache she'd felt in those months after Harold's death, when the future seemed like an empty room with no furniture. Working here wouldn't be easy, she said slowly. You'd be starting at the bottom, learning systems you've never encountered. Some of our employees are young enough to be your children. Your ego would take a beating. My ego's already beaten. Michael's smile was rueful, self-aware in a way that reminded her of the boy he'd been before ambition and expectations had hardened him into the man he'd become. Besides, I've been thinking about what you said that night at dinner, about learning new things. Maybe it's time I proved I'm not too old to start over either. Through the office window, Brenda could see Jessica approaching with a clipboard and an expression that suggested another crisis requiring immediate attention. The success of Greenrise had brought wonderful problems. Expansion opportunities, franchise inquiries, investor meetings that required her to travel to Atlanta more frequently than she liked. But it had also brought the constant pressure of decisions that would affect not just her future, but the livelihoods of the dozen employees who now depended on the farm's continued growth. There's something else, Michael said, his voice dropping to a register she remembered from his childhood confessions. Amanda's been asking about you, about the farm. Her divorce is getting ugly, and I think she's realizing that having family support might matter more than maintaining appearances. The mention of her daughter sent a complex mix of emotions through Brenda's chest. Amanda's silence had been even more pointed than Michael's, her embarrassment about her mother's eccentric phase, expressed through carefully neutral responses to direct questions and complete avoidance of any topic related to Greenrise. She's welcome here any time, Brenda said carefully. Both of you are. But I won't be patronized or treated like an amusing elderly relative who's playing at business. I understand. Michael straightened, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of the man he might become, humbled but not broken, experienced but not cynical. What I said that night about you being too old to take risks, I was wrong. I was projecting my own fears about aging onto you. The apology was simple, unadorned by excuses or qualifications. It landed with more impact than flowery speeches might have managed, acknowledging not just the hurt, but the assumptions that had caused it. Jessica's knock on the door interrupted the moment. Sorry to bother you, but we've got Earl Johnson in the parking lot with what looks like a county inspector. Should I call our lawyer? Brenda felt the familiar tightening in her chest that Earl's presence always provoked. The man's opposition had become increasingly desperate, as Greenrise's success became undeniable, his tactics shifting from public protests to bureaucratic harassment. Each inspection had revealed minor violations that required expensive corrections. Each permit renewal had demanded additional documentation that stretched their administrative resources. No, she said, decision crystallizing with surprising clarity. I'll handle this myself. Michael stepped forward. Maybe I should. No. Brenda's voice carried the authority she'd once used to quell unruly school board meetings. This is my business, my responsibility. Earl Johnson and I have been dancing around each other for months. It's time to settle this directly." She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her son. "There's a position available in our community outreach program. We need someone to coordinate with local restaurants, educational institutions, and other farms. Someone who understands sales but also understands relationships. The pay is about half what you're used to, and you'd be working for Jessica as much as for me." Michael's eyes widened slightly. "You're offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity," Brenda corrected. "What you make of it is up to you." She left him standing in her office, surrounded by the evidence of her success and the possibility of his own redemption. The walk across the parking lot to where Earl Johnson waited gave her time to center herself, to call up the resolve that had carried her through school board politics and family resistance. Earl stood beside a county truck, his bulk imposing in the afternoon heat. The inspector, a thin man with a clipboard and the harried expression of someone caught between conflicting authorities, looked uncomfortable with his role in whatever drama was about to unfold. "Earl," Brenda said, her voice carrying across the 20 feet that separated them, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Mrs. Miller." His tone was formal, carefully neutral, but she could see the frustration simmering beneath his professional courtesy. "Mr. Davidson here has some concerns about your water usage permits. Seems there might be some irregularities in your documentation." The inspector, Davidson, shifted uncomfortably. "It's probably just a paperwork issue, Mrs. Miller. If you could provide the original permit applications." "Of course." Brenda smiled, the expression warm enough to be disarming but sharp enough to cut. "They're in my office. But first, Earl, why don't you tell me what this is really about?" The challenge hung in the air between them, as clear as a thrown gauntlet. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of her farm in operation, trucks loading, equipment humming, employees calling to each other as they coordinated the day's harvest. All of it evidence of what she'd built, what she'd proven possible. Earl Johnson might have the weight of tradition and community influence behind him, but Brenda Miller had something more powerful: the quiet satisfaction of being absolutely, undeniably right. Earl Johnson's face flushed red beneath his John Deere cap, the color deepening as Brenda's challenge settled between them like dust after a slap. The inspector, Davidson, clutched his clipboard tighter, clearly wishing he was anywhere else but caught in the crossfire between two of the county's most formidable personalities. "What this is about," Earl said, his voice carrying the controlled fury of a man unaccustomed to being cornered, "is protecting this community from reckless experimentation that threatens our way of life." "Your way of life?" Brenda corrected, her tone sharp as winter air. "Let's be honest about what we're really discussing here, Earl. You're not concerned about water permits or documentation irregularities. You're terrified that everything you've built your reputation on is becoming obsolete." The words hit their mark. Earl's jaw tightened, and she could see the struggle between his public persona and his private fears playing out across his weathered features. Behind him, Davidson shuffled nervously, probably calculating how quickly he could retreat to his truck if this confrontation escalated. "Mrs. Miller," Davidson ventured, "if we could just review the paperwork." "Of course." Brenda gestured toward the facility behind her, where trucks were loading the afternoon harvest destined for restaurants in Atlanta. "But first, why don't you take a look at what we're actually doing here? See the operation that's apparently such a threat to our community's well-being?" Earl stepped forward, his bulk casting a shadow across the asphalt. "Don't turn this into theater, Brenda. You've had your fun, proved whatever point you thought you needed to prove. But this fantasy has gone far enough." "Fantasy?" The word came out like a laugh, sharp and disbelieving. "Earl, look around you. We're employing 12 people full-time, paying wages 20% above county average. We're producing 15,000 pounds of fresh vegetables monthly, supplying restaurants from here to Savannah. Our water usage is 60% lower than traditional farming methods, and we've eliminated pesticide runoff entirely." She pulled out her phone, scrolling to the photos from yesterday's harvest. "This is what fantasy looks like. Tyler trained these new employees himself. Maria from your own church now manages our customer relations. Even Pastor Bill has been here 3 times, asking about expanding our educational programs." Earl's face darkened at the mention of his grandson. "You turned my own family against me," filled Tyler's head with nonsense about sustainable this and organic that. The boy used to understand the value of hard work, real farming. Real farming? Brenda's voice rose, carrying across the parking lot. "Earl, when was the last time you had a profitable season? When did you last sleep through the night without worrying about weather, commodity prices, or whether the bank would extend your operating loan?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Earl's mouth opened, then closed, the fight visibly draining from his shoulders. Davidson seized the moment of silence. "Perhaps we could just—" "No." Earl's voice was quieter now, but no less determined. "This isn't about permits, Davidson. This is about what happens when people forget their place in the natural order of things." "Natural order?" Brenda stepped closer, close enough to see the defeat Earl was trying to hide behind bluster. "You mean the order where experience counts for nothing, where innovation is dismissed as foolishness, where anyone over 60 is expected to quietly disappear?" Quote. The parking lot had grown quiet, except for the distant hum of the facility's climate control systems. Even the loading dock workers had paused in their activities, sensing the weight of the confrontation unfolding near the main entrance. "I know what this is really about," Brenda continued, her voice gentler now but no less cutting. "You're watching everything change around you, and instead of adapting, you're trying to tear down anything that reminds you how far behind you've fallen." Earl's hands clenched at his sides. "You don't know anything about what I've sacrificed for this community. 4 generations of Johnsons have farmed this land, contributed to this county's economy, provided food for families. And Tyler makes 5, Brenda interrupted. "Your grandson is carrying on that tradition, Earl. He's just doing it better than you ever imagined possible." The mention of Tyler seemed to break something in Earl's composure. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked every one of his 65 years. "He won't even come home for Sunday dinner," Earl said, the words barely above a whisper. "His own grandfather, and he won't sit at my table." The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Davidson had given up all pretense of conducting an inspection and was openly watching the drama unfold, his clipboard forgotten at his side. "That's your choice, not his," Brenda said, but her tone had softened. "Tyler's been trying to bridge the gap between old methods and new ones. You're the one who made it an either-or proposition." Earl raised his head, meeting her eyes for the first time since the confrontation began. "So what now? You've won. Your fancy farm is successful, your methods work, the whole county's talking about the miracle of Greenrise. What more do you want?" "I want my community back," Brenda replied simply. "I want to stop fighting about change and start embracing it. I want Tyler to come to Sunday dinner at his grandfather's house, and I want his grandfather to be proud of what he's accomplished." She gestured toward the facility behind her, where the afternoon shift was transitioning to evening operations. "There's room for both ways of farming, Earl, traditional methods and new ones. Competition doesn't have to mean destruction." Earl was quiet for a long moment, studying the building that had become the symbol of everything he'd opposed. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Maybe," he said slowly, "it's time this old dog learned some new tricks." Davidson cleared his throat, suddenly remembering his official purpose. "About those permits, Mrs. Miller." "They're in order," Earl said before Brenda could respond. "I've seen enough to know this operation meets every regulation we've got. Probably exceeds them." The admission fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything that had come before. Brenda felt the tension leave her shoulders, replaced by something that might have been hope. "Thank you, Earl." He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "Don't make me regret this, Brenda Miller." As she watched him walk back to his truck, Brenda realized the real victory wasn't proving her children wrong or building a successful business. It was this moment, the possibility of a community learning to grow together instead of apart. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Greenrise parking lot as Amanda Miller Blackwood pulled her BMW to a stop beside her mother's sensible Honda. 6 months had passed since Earl Johnson's grudging acknowledgement of the farm's legitimacy, and the changes in Millbrook were visible even from the highway. new restaurants advertising locally grown produce, a boutique hotel marketing agritourism packages, and tour buses that arrive twice weekly to showcase the future of farming. Amanda sat in her car for a moment, gathering courage she'd once thought unnecessary for facing her own mother. The divorce papers in her briefcase were signed, her Atlanta partnership dissolved, and her children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Jake, waited in the back seat with the mixture of excitement and uncertainty that had become their constant companions. "Is this where Grandma Brenda works?" Emma asked, pressing her face to the window to study the gleaming facility that had replaced the shabby Walmart of her early memories. "It is," Amanda replied, watching Tyler Johnson guide a group of college students through the outdoor growing demonstration area. The young man moved with the confidence of someone who'd found his calling, his grandfather Earl standing nearby with an expression that managed to combine pride and bewilderment in equal measure. "Can we see inside?" Jake's voice carried the exhausted patience of a child who'd spent 3 hours in a car, while his mother worked up courage for a conversation that should have happened months ago. Amanda checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, noting the lines that hadn't been there when she'd last spoken to her mother. The separation from Richard had been brutal, conducted through lawyers and mediators who'd reduced 15 years of marriage to asset distribution and custody schedules. The partner track at Morrison, Caldwell & Associates had proven incompatible with single motherhood, forcing choices she'd never imagined having to make. "Let's go find out," she said, opening the car door to the warm October air that carried the faint scent of growing things and new possibilities. The transformation of the old Walmart into Greenrise had been documented extensively in architectural magazines, but seeing it in person still took Amanda's breath away. Where she remembered bare concrete and flickering fluorescent lights, Jessica Thompson had created soaring spaces filled with natural light and the vertical towers that gave the farm its name. The reception area buzzed with activity, school groups scheduling tours, restaurant owners placing orders, and what appeared to be investors from Atlanta studying production charts with the intensity of people evaluating a stock purchase. "Amanda?" The voice belonged to Michael, who emerged from a hallway marked Community Outreach, carrying a folder thick with what looked like partnership agreements. Her brother had changed in the months since joining Greenrise. The desperate edge of unemployment had been replaced by something that looked surprisingly like contentment. "Mama didn't tell me you were coming." "She doesn't know," Amanda admitted, suddenly feeling like the teenager who'd once snuck out to meet boys her parents wouldn't approve of. "I should have called, but you inherited the Miller pride," Michael finished with a grin that reminded her of the brother she'd grown up with before. Careers and expectations had driven them into separate corners of success. "Don't worry, she'll be thrilled. She asks about you and the kids every time we talk." Emma and Jake had discovered the interactive display that showed how hydroponic systems worked. Their earlier car-bound restlessness transformed into fascination with water pumps and nutrient solutions. Amanda watched them, remembering her own childhood visits to her mother's school, where Brenda had commanded respect from teenagers who towered over her but never questioned her authority. "How is she?" Amanda asked, the question carrying weight beyond simple inquiry about health or happiness. Michael's expression grew thoughtful. "Different. Better, I think. You know how she used to carry all that worry about whether she was doing enough, being enough? That's gone. She's found something that's entirely hers." The words hit harder than Amanda had expected. During her own crisis, the grinding revelation that Richard had been having affairs for years, the gradual realization that her partnership track depended on sacrificing everything she claimed to value. She'd found herself thinking about her mother with a mixture of envy and regret. Brenda Miller had been dismissed, underestimated, and written off, but she'd responded by building something undeniably impressive. "Ms. Blackwood?" The voice belonged to Maria Santos, the receptionist whose warm efficiency had impressed every visitor since Greenrise opened. "Mrs. Miller is in the production area with some visitors from the Department of Agriculture. Should I let her know you're here?" "Actually," Amanda said, decision crystallizing with surprising clarity, "could we wait? I'd like the children to see the operation first." The tour that followed was a revelation wrapped in education. Tyler Johnson proved to be a natural teacher, explaining complex agricultural concepts in terms that made 8-year-olds nod with understanding, while addressing the sophisticated questions Emma asked about sustainability metrics and resource efficiency. Jake was mesmerized by the automated seeding robots, while Emma peppered Tyler with questions about crop rotation and nutrient density that suggested she'd inherited her grandmother's analytical mind. "Your grandmother designed the layout for the educational areas," Tyler explained as they walked through the demonstration garden, where traditional and hydroponic methods grew side by side. "She said if we were going to change how people think about farming, we needed to show them why it mattered." Amanda found herself studying the facility with lawyer's eyes, noting the meticulous attention to safety protocols, the sophisticated monitoring systems, and the obvious pride employees took in their work. This wasn't the vanity project she'd once feared. It was a legitimate business that had found ways to be both profitable and purposeful. "Mommy, look." Jake's voice carried across the growing floor as he discovered the observation deck that provided a bird's-eye view of the entire operation. Below them, workers moved through the tower systems with practiced efficiency, harvesting lettuce and herbs that would be on restaurant tables within hours. "It's like a science fiction movie," Emma breathed, her face pressed against the safety glass. "But real. Very real," said a familiar voice behind them. Amanda turned to find her mother approaching, flanked by two men in suits who carried themselves with the careful authority of government officials. Brenda's hair was shorter than Amanda remembered, more silver than brown, but her posture carried the same erect confidence that had intimidated school board members for decades. "I was hoping you'd come," Brenda said simply, her eyes moving from Amanda to the children, with an expression that mixed joy and careful restraint. "Emma, Jake, you've gotten so tall." The awkwardness that Amanda had feared didn't materialize. Emma launched into an immediate recitation of everything she'd learned about hydroponic systems, while Jake demonstrated his newfound knowledge of automated irrigation. Their enthusiasm bridged the gap that adult complications had created, giving both women time to study each other across months of careful distance. "The facility is remarkable," Amanda said when the children's initial excitement had settled into exploration of the interactive displays. "I can see why the agricultural department is interested." "Actually," one of the suited men interjected, "we're here about expansion possibilities. The USDA is launching a pilot program for sustainable agriculture initiatives, and GreenRise has been selected as a potential demonstration site for scaling vertical farming operations." The implications hit Amanda immediately: federal funding, national attention, the kind of recognition that transformed local success stories into industry paradigms. Her mother had built something that government agencies considered worth replicating. "We should talk," Amanda said quietly, watching Emma help Jake reach a display panel designed for taller visitors. "Privately, I mean. There are things I need to say." Brenda nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "My office?" The walk through the facility gave Amanda time to process the scope of what her mother had accomplished. Past the break room where shift workers grabbed coffee, past the loading dock where trucks waited for evening deliveries, past the administrative offices, where Michael coordinated partnerships with schools and restaurants. Everything spoke to careful planning, successful execution, and growth that had exceeded even optimistic projections. Brenda's office had been transformed since Amanda's last visit. The wall of certificates and awards had expanded to include federal recognitions and industry honors. Photos showed Brenda with agricultural officials, environmental advocates, and business leaders who'd come to study GreenRise's methods. But what struck Amanda most was the personal touches: framed pictures of employees, thank you notes from local restaurants, and a prominently displayed photo of Tyler Johnson receiving his environmental science degree. "I owe you an apology," Amanda said before she lost courage. "Several apologies, actually." Brenda settled into her chair, hands folded with the patience she'd once shown difficult students. "I'm listening." "I was embarrassed," Amanda continued, the words coming faster now that she'd started. "Not by your failure. I was embarrassed by the possibility of your success. Because if you could start over at 70 and build something this impressive, what did that say about my own choices?" The confession hung between them, like a bridge neither was certain could bear weight. Through the office window they could see Emma and Jake in the visitor area, absorbed in educational games that taught agricultural principles through interactive play. I spent 15 years building a career that I thought defined me, Amanda continued. When Richard left, when the partnership dissolved, I realized I'd never built anything that was entirely mine. You had the courage to start over. I was too afraid to even try. Brenda's expression softened, revealing the mother beneath the successful entrepreneur. Fear isn't always wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes it's just premature. Maybe. Amanda gestured toward the window, where her children were building virtual farms on tablet screens. But watching Emma and Jake today, seeing how excited they get about growing things and solving problems, I don't want them to inherit my fear. I want them to inherit your courage instead. The conversation that followed was tentative but genuine, touching on practical matters like Amanda's plans for relocating to Millbrook and the legal work a growing agricultural business might require. But underneath ran deeper currents: forgiveness offered and accepted, respect finally acknowledged, and the possibility of rebuilding relationships that both women had thought permanently damaged. As afternoon faded into evening, the federal officials completed their inspection and departed with promises of funding decisions within 60 days. The day shift gave way to evening workers, and the parking lot gradually emptied except for family cars and Tyler Johnson's hybrid truck. There's something else, Brenda said as they prepared to leave. I've been thinking about succession planning. Not because I'm ready to retire, she added quickly, but because Greenrise has grown beyond what one person can manage alone. Amanda felt her pulse quicken. What kind of succession planning? The kind that acknowledges this business will outlive me, Brenda replied. The kind that ensures the values we've built here continue to the next generation. Jessica will always be the technical heart of this operation, but we need someone who understands both business law and family dynamics. The implication was clear, even unspoken. Amanda found herself imagining a different kind of life, one where her legal skills served a purpose beyond billable hours, where her children could grow up understanding that success meant building something lasting rather than simply accumulating wealth. I'd like that, Amanda said simply. Very much. As they walked toward the parking lot, Emma skipped ahead while Jake peppered Tyler with final questions about when they could visit again. The evening air carried the scent of growing things and the promise of harvest seasons yet to come. Behind them, Greenrise hummed with quiet efficiency, its towers reaching toward darkening sky like promises kept and dreams finally given room to grow. The morning sun filtered through the glass panels of Greenrise vertical farms, casting prismatic rainbows across the towering walls of lettuce, tomatoes, and herbs that stretched toward the ceiling like a verdant cathedral. Brenda Miller stood at the entrance, watching as the first cars began pulling into the parking lot for the one-year anniversary celebration. The abandoned Walmart that had once symbolized economic decline now hummed with life, its interior transformed into something that still took her breath away. Rows upon rows of vegetables growing in perfect vertical harmony, fed by nutrient-rich water that cycled through the system with mathematical precision. Nervous? Jessica Thompson appeared at her elbow, carrying a tablet loaded with the day's schedule. At 30, the young agricultural engineer had grown into her role as operations manager with a confidence that still surprised Brenda. The skeptical woman who'd reluctantly agreed to meet for coffee 18 months ago had become something Brenda had never expected. A daughter of choice, bound not by blood but by shared vision and mutual respect. Brenda adjusted the collar of her navy blazer, the same one she'd worn for countless school board meetings, when intimidation tactics were part of her daily toolkit. Not nervous, she replied, though her fingers betrayed her by smoothing an invisible wrinkle. Reflective. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Tyler Johnson directing the setup crew as they arranged tables and chairs in the community education space. Earl's grandson had grown into his role as community outreach coordinator, his environmental science degree finally finding practical application. His grandfather's truck sat in the parking lot, a sight that still surprised her. Earl Johnson attending a celebration of sustainable agriculture would have been unthinkable a year ago. Mom, the news crew from Atlanta is here early. Michael's voice carried none of the condescension that had marked their relationship for so long. At 49, her eldest son had discovered humility the hard way, through unemployment, financial desperation, and the gradual realization that his mother's crazy scheme had become the most innovative agricultural project in the Southeast. His role as business development manager suited him better than she'd expected. His corporate experience, combined with newfound respect for her vision, had helped secure contracts with restaurants and grocery chains throughout Georgia. The irony wasn't lost on her. The children who'd suggested assisted living now worked for the company she'd built from nothing but determination and a savings account they'd never known existed. "Tell them we'll do interviews after the community presentation," Brenda instructed. "This day is for Millbrook first." Amanda emerged from the administrative offices, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that would have horrified her corporate self. The high-powered Atlanta attorney had shocked everyone by relocating to Millbrook 6 months ago, trading her partnership at a prestigious law firm for the role of general counsel at Greenrise. Her children, 10-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Jake, had adjusted to small-town life with surprising ease, spending their afternoons in the farm's education center, learning about sustainable agriculture alongside their grandmother. "The mayor's here," Amanda announced, along with half the county commissioners. "Pastor Bill is setting up the blessing ceremony, and Dot's in the kitchen making sure we have enough sweet tea for the entire state of Georgia." Dorothy Washington, now 70 and still Brenda's fiercest advocate, had insisted on handling the catering despite offers from professional services. "Nobody's going to remember the fancy speeches," she'd declared, while rolling out biscuit dough at 5 that morning. "But they'll remember whether the food was made with love." The sound of voices grew louder as more community members arrived. Through the windows, Brenda watched familiar faces from Millbrook Baptist Church mingling with agricultural scientists from the University of Georgia, local farmers talking with representatives from the USDA, teenagers taking selfies beside the vertical growing towers. The diversity of the crowd reflected something she hadn't anticipated when this journey began: the way innovation could serve as a bridge between generations, education levels, and previously incompatible worldviews. "Mrs. Miller?" A voice behind her belonged to Sarah Chen, a journalist from Modern Farmer magazine who'd driven down from Nashville to cover the anniversary celebration. "I was hoping we could talk about the expansion plans. Our readers are fascinated by the franchise model you're developing." Brenda nodded, though her attention remained fixed on the parking lot where Earl Johnson was climbing out of his truck, with the careful movements of a man whose pride had taken as much of a beating as his aging joints. At 66, the fourth-generation farmer had fought her project with everything he had: zoning challenges, permit disputes, whisper campaigns about her mental fitness. His opposition had been rooted in fear rather than malice, she'd eventually realized. Fear that traditional farming was becoming obsolete, that his life's work would be dismissed as backward, that change meant erasure rather than evolution. "The franchise model isn't about growth for growth's sake," Brenda replied, her principal's instincts kicking in as she shifted into teaching mode. "It's about proving that sustainable agriculture can work anywhere, from abandoned big-box stores in rural communities to converted warehouses in urban food deserts. Each facility needs to serve its local community first." Pastor Bill Hayes approached, his smile carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd helped broker peace between warring factions. "Ready for the blessing?" he asked. "I think we've got everyone gathered." The crowd had indeed assembled in the central courtyard, a space Jessica had designed to showcase the growing systems while providing room for community events. Brenda looked out at the faces, some she'd known for decades, others who'd become part of her life through this unexpected chapter. Michael stood with his twin daughters, home from college for the celebration, their expressions mixing pride with lingering amazement at their grandmother's transformation. Amanda's children pressed close to her sides, Emma clutching a tomato she'd grown herself in the kids' section of the farm. Earl Johnson stood near the back, his weathered hands clasped behind him, his presence a testament to the possibility of change at any age. Beside him, Tyler beamed with the satisfaction of someone who'd found the courage to choose conscience over convention. "Friends," Pastor Bill's voice carried across the space with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "A year ago, some of us thought Brenda Miller had lost her mind." Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. "We forgot that the same woman who'd managed our teenagers for 4 decades might know a thing or two about making impossible things happen." Brenda felt tears threatening and blinked them back. She'd cried enough during this journey. Tears of frustration, loneliness, and eventually joy. Today called for something different. Today called for gratitude. This facility produces 30,000 pounds of fresh vegetables every month, Pastor Bill continued, employs 47 people, and has inspired similar projects in 12 other communities. But those aren't the numbers that matter most. He paused, his gaze finding Brenda in the crowd. What matters is that a woman refused to let other people's limitations become her own. What matters is that she showed us it's never too late to dream, to grow, to start over. The applause started slowly, building as Earl Johnson stepped forward. The old farmer's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. I fought this project because I thought it meant the end of everything I'd worked for. He looked directly at Brenda. I was wrong. It means the beginning of something better, something my grandson can be proud to continue. Tyler moved to stand beside his grandfather, the symbolic gesture bridging more than just their personal relationship. Traditional and innovative, old and young, fear and hope, all standing together in a space that had once been a symbol of economic failure and was now a beacon of possibility. Brenda Miller didn't just start a business, Earl continued, his voice growing stronger. She started a conversation about what we're capable of, regardless of what anyone else thinks we should be doing with our lives. The celebration continued for hours. Local news crews documented the story of the 70-year-old entrepreneur whose success had transformed not just an abandoned building, but an entire community's understanding of aging, innovation, and the power of refusing to accept limitations imposed by others. Agricultural scientists took notes on the growing systems while children ran between the plant towers, their laughter echoing off the glass ceiling. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of peach that would have made Georgia proud, Brenda found herself alone in the administrative offices she'd designed to overlook the growing floor. Through the windows, she could see her family cleaning up from the celebration, Michael and Amanda working side by side for the first time in years, their children helping Tyler stack chairs, while Jessica ran final system checks on the automated growing towers. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. Earl Johnson stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking every bit as uncomfortable as he had during their first confrontation at the town hall meeting. Come in, Brenda said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. He settled himself carefully, his arthritis evident in the way he favored his left knee. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. A real one, not the half-hearted thing I managed during the blessing. Earl? No, let me finish. His voice carried the determination of a man who'd finally found the courage to speak truth. I spent months trying to stop you because I was scared. Scared that everything I knew about farming was becoming obsolete. Scared that Tyler would leave for the city and never look back. Scared that admitting you were right meant admitting I'd been wrong about more than just agriculture. Brenda leaned back in her chair, studying the man who'd been her fiercest opponent. And now? Now I see that embracing new ideas doesn't mean abandoning old values. He gestured toward the window where Tyler was demonstrating the hydroponic system to a group of visiting farmers. That boy's not leaving anymore. He's found a way to honor the land and his heritage while doing something that matters for the future. He's always been welcome here, Brenda said quietly, even when you and I were at each other's throats. Earl's smile carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. That's what I'm apologizing for. You showed grace when I showed stubbornness. You built bridges when I burned them. He paused, studying his weathered hands. My daddy always said that wisdom isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing when you've been wrong and having the courage to admit it. Through the window, they watched as Amanda's daughter Emma carefully harvested cherry tomatoes under Tyler's patient guidance, her face glowing with the satisfaction of growing something with her own hands. In 6 months, the child had gone from a city kid who thought vegetables came from grocery stores to a passionate advocate for sustainable agriculture. What you've built here goes beyond farming, Earl continued. You've shown this community that age doesn't determine worth, that innovation doesn't require abandoning wisdom, that dreams don't have expiration dates. He stood slowly, extending his hand. I'd be honored to work with you on expanding sustainable practices to traditional farms. If you'll have a stubborn old fool as a partner. Brenda rose and shook his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of decades spent working the land. I'd be honored to work with an experienced farmer who understands the value of adapting to change. After Earl left, Brenda remained at the window, watching her family finish the cleanup. The sight of 3 generations working together, her children finally understanding that her success didn't diminish their worth, her grandchildren learning that innovation and tradition could coexist, filled her with a satisfaction deeper than any professional achievement. Her reflection was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Jessica appeared, followed by Michael, Amanda, and the grandchildren, all carrying plates laden with Dot's leftover desserts. "Figured you might be hungry," Jessica said, settling into a chair. "And we thought this would be a good time for a family meeting." "Oh," Brenda said with mock concern. "The last time my children called a family meeting, they tried to put me in assisted living." Emma giggled while Jake launched into an enthusiastic recounting of his favorite moments from the day. Michael and Amanda exchanged a look that carried years of unspoken communication. "Actually," Michael said, his voice carrying none of the condescension that had once characterized their conversations, "we wanted to talk about the future. About what comes next." Amanda nodded, pulling out a folder thick with documents. "We've been working on the legal framework for the franchise model. Jessica's been developing the training protocols. And we think it's time to talk about succession planning." "Succession planning?" Brenda raised an eyebrow. "Are you trying to retire me again?" "We're trying to plan for the future," Amanda said, her tone gentle but firm. "You built something incredible here, Mom. Something that could transform communities across the country. But that kind of growth requires infrastructure." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. ...